This video is sponsored by GameMaker. More on them later. It is very hard to separate video games from its business side. We like to latch on to the idea of amazing cult classic games that are worth playing despite not selling very well, but today I'm going to be looking at something that exists outside of any kind of subjective quality. It's one thing to find hope in a game that didn't sell well, but games that had millions poured into them that weren't able to make much of a return on that investment are a really big problem that often cause companies to go bust because of it. Hopefully just talking about them is perfectly safe. Creating a video game usually costs quite a lot of money, and so we're seeing more indie games because they're slightly more cost effective. And if you think that game development in general is kind of too complicated these days, then you're in luck, because this video is sponsored by GameMaker, who specialise in making video game development a lot easier to understand and learn, with the best cross-platform development kit around. It doesn't seem like a waste of money to me. If you've watched one of my videos before, you'll know that I've always wanted to make a game, but just didn't have the time or aptitude to spend enough time to learn how to do that. Luckily, GameMaker are here to make all of this a piece of cake with their software that's been used to make the likes of Nuclear Throne, Hyperlight Drifter, and some obscure title called Undertale, I think? Something like that. All of these incredible games were made using GameMaker, and considering how wildly different they are aesthetically and tonally, that should give you an indication of how creative you can be with GameMaker. If you have a game concept in your head but can't quite wrap your head around the coding, then don't worry, because GameMaker lets you drag and drop assets where you want them to go and takes care of the coding for you. A streamlined process that has given rise to someone like Nerduke, who uses GameMaker to help support his family with the games that he's created from it. It's perfect for newcomers because everything you need to take the idea from concept to a finished game can all be done through GameMaker. Plus, if you ever need a bit of help, GameMaker comes with a wide range of tutorials for filling in any holes in your knowledge, and there's even a community of thousands of budding game developers who you can learn ideas from and share some of your own with. If this all sounds wonderful and you can't wait to bring your idea to life, then you're in luck, because you can start your free trial today, and all throughout July, GameMaker are running a promotion where you can download GameMaker Studio 2 for free. Go to the link in this video's description and join so many others who are creating the games they've always wanted. Thank you again to GameMaker for sponsoring this video. Okay then, I think it's time to burn some money. All throughout this video there's going to be this fun power struggle between whether or not these games are any good or not, and if they deserve to undersell as much as they did. Just giving you a fair warning, because I know a video like this with a title like that comes with a fair deal of implication that these games are embarrassments when they very often aren't. With that out of the way, let's talk about Shenmue. Depending on who you ask, you might get wildly different responses when asking people how they feel about Shenmue as a video game, and if its iconic status means anything for its quality. Some people think it's a waste of time that has aged horribly, whereas others love its quirks and worship the ground it walks on, so I guess divisive is the word to use. And it's hard for divisive games to sell well. Which often isn't a problem for games from popular franchises that become divisive through some particular design decision, but when you're Shenmue and you're creating a franchise from scratch that doesn't fall into any of the conventional genres, then you are facing an uphill battle to convince anyone to buy into this new idea. So Shenmue didn't sell very well, which is one problem, but it's a problem that is compounded exponentially by just how much it cost to bring Shenmue to life. In 1999, Sega pumped close to $70 million into this thing, which looks more like $100 million after inflation all these years later, and that made it the most expensive game ever made at the turn of the millennium. The problem with Shenmue is that the Dreamcast needed a system-selling new game, and once Sega turned to Yu Suzuki with a blank checkbook to create whatever kind of ridiculously ambitious game that he could think of, complete with a whole new graphical style that needed to be designed and engineered from the ground up, it was always likely to cost a ton of money. It cost so much across both Shenmue games, and with Sega unable to recoup the losses, it likely sealed the deal on the Dreamcast being their last console, something that was already hemorrhaging money. But hey, at least they finished the trilogy after so many years. Only took a Kickstarter campaign to make it happen, but it happened. Fans are probably the only way to get funding, to be honest. Marketing has to play a big role in all of this, surely. For some of the bigger games out there, marketing can cost almost as much, if not more, than the development itself, because half the battle of getting someone to play your game is them knowing about it in the first place. So all you need to do is create a memorable but mostly inoffensive campaign and you'll be fine. But where's the fun in that? Well, I can't shed too much of a light on marketing because I have even less experience in that field, but I do a lot of reading and I tend to pick up vibes from how people feel about certain marketing campaigns, especially those that are infamous enough to remain memorable 2 decades later. Daikatana is a train wreck of a video game for a variety of different reasons, but mostly because of how the game was hyped to shit by John Romero off the back of Doom rocking everyone's world and the general consensus that Romero's band of merry men could do no wrong. I actually like the concept of Daikatana because a time-travelling FPS is a fairly unique concept for the early 2000s if we pretend that Time Splitters didn't come out in the same year, and I think that if development was handled a bit more delicately, then we could have been looking at something decent. Or we could just throw money around like confetti at a wedding. There may actually be some similarities between Shenmue and Daikatana, although with a lot more public sympathy in Shenmue's favour, on account of no one ever being Yu Suzuki's bitch, but hey, we'll get to that. Both games were designed and created with close to unlimited budgets as hilariously over-ambitious projects, and in flying too close to the sun, they both wound up a bit crispy and significantly out of pocket. I don't want to criticise too harshly because risks were taken in pursuit of creativity, but at least with Daikatana, these risks weren't calculated very well, and when you're moving the game from engine to try to stay with the times because development is just that turbulent, then we have a problem. Delays led to longer time in the oven trying to fix things, but Romero's team kept spending and it put more pressure on Daikatana, making it all back somehow when it eventually released in the year 2000. Perhaps if Romero and Ironstorm knew that development would run and run, they wouldn't have allowed the public's first opinion of the game to be formed off of the back of one poster released in 1997 that claims that John Romero is gonna make you his bitch because Daikatana is just that intense. Reaction to this, unsurprisingly, tarnished the game before it was even halfway through development, and meant that Daikatana didn't stand a hope in hell's chance of clawing back all of those expenses. Made worse by the game suffering from all the delays and engine changes and being so far below these boosted expectations. They were banking a lot on Romero's name carrying Daikatana forward, but it just didn't work out in the end. Fast forward to 2015, and John Romero opened his 9th game studio. He's almost a poison chalice at this point. The lesson you can take from Daikatana, other than not antagonizing your prospective buyers, is to not overcomplicate video games. I know that's easy to say and may sound hollow considering how absurdly complicated game development can get sometimes, but if you can start a project with a clear vision of what you want to do, then there's every chance you can avoid falling into one of the several circles of development hell. Yeah, we're going there, because it's hard to go through development hell without spending and wasting a lot of money in the process. And while Daikatana had a few issues with new game engines and scrapped progress, that is a drop in the ocean compared to Duke Nukem Forever. I still remember a time when this game was essentially vaporware and the subject of so many delays and being passed to so many different developers that I kind of assumed that no self-respecting publisher would attempt to release it. 15 years is a hell of a long time that requires its own article on Wikipedia to detail every small moment that worked against this game's favour, but you know me, I'm just interested in the stuff that costs money to do. So like, most of it. Duke Nukem Forever's development was so chaotic that it's actually quite hard to work out how much money was spent on this game because there were so many studios involved with this and they all had like new budgets and they had to work out what they were spending and what they were getting out of it, that it's kind of impossible with the information we had to work out exactly who got what. But overall, Duke Nukem Forever had quite a lot of money put into it and not a lot came out, so that'll do it for me. It's so weird to be talking about this game without having to pick apart why it's so bad, but I can channel at least some of that into explaining why it costs so much to make it so bad, you know? The model development is one obvious factor where every team that came in had their own idea of what to do under the instructions of 2K Games, who were desperately trying to turn this game into some kind of finished product that somewhat resembles the franchise that it comes from. But it's worth remembering that every new studio who came in would have done so with a renewed budget with which they'd attempt to fix Duke Nukem Forever with. It's hard if not impossible to tell who had what and how much was wasted, but we do know from public record that the head of 3D Realms, George Broussard, invested between 20 to 30 million of his own money for some reason, presumably as some misguided attempt to get this game over the line at whatever the cost. I mean, it got there, but by the time it came out, Duke Nukem Forever had spent a couple of years being stitched together by Gearbox Software, and their logo is on the front cover, so even then, 3D Realms didn't benefit much from this huge outlay of cash. Even less so when DNF hit the store shelves and no one bought it, making the whole thing an exceedingly costly lesson in cutting your losses instead of trying to course correct a ship that is already halfway underwater. But hey, you can throw your poo at a wall, so it wasn't a total loss. $30 million, right there. When I think about what type of games would be the most expensive to make, I naturally gravitate towards the massive AAA, hyper-realistic experiences that would, feel more like movies than more interactive experiences. And indeed, Red Dead Redemption 2 currently has the record for the most expensive game ever made, with about $500 million split between marketing and development. That being said, away from those, surely the most expensive games are ones that need constant upkeep and updates, because you're never truly finished. Oh no, the MMOs. At the same time, MMOs often have more staying power by virtue of players often needing to pay a subscription fee to keep playing, and so as a flow of money, it can be a handy tool for a studio to have. There is a lot of risk though, and it can be a very costly undertaking that only becomes more dangerous the deeper you go without any reward. And so a failed MMO is like a vacuum for hopes, dreams, money, and a company's continued existence. You might have heard of Real-Time Worlds from the amazing work they did with the original Crackdown with help from David Jones, who was a part of the team who made the first Grand Theft Auto game. And that's a lot of lip service for a studio that only made 2 games before folding in 2010. It certainly wasn't because Crackdown underperformed, and actually it might be the opposite, since that game's success galvanized Real-Time into going ahead with something more ambitious and putting their money into their long-time project of a huge MMO where you run around and shoot people, something called APB, All Points Bulletin. Does that name sound familiar? Well, if you know it, it's probably not for a good reason. You cannot fault Real-Time Worlds for their ambition though. APB was conceived as an MMO version of GTA, and I know we kinda have that now, but APB's 2010 release preceded GTA Online's by 3 years and could well have been as popular as Rockstar's cash cow is today. Real-Time's approach to this concept was bold, since APB would lack a traditional mission system, and much of the game would proceed as a reaction to in-game conflicts between the 2 warring factions, enforcers and the criminals. They also stated that there wouldn't be a subscription fee to pay, which was encouraging, but also one of the first signs that Real-Time didn't 100% know what they were taking on with this concept. Something that rang very true when they announced that APB would cost $49.99 at launch, and after 50 hours of playing would now cost an extra $7 per 20 hours, or you could pay $10 a month if that sounds slightly more sane. Oh okay, a daily subscription rather than a monthly subscription. No. On release, APB was met with mixed reviews because of how rushed and glitchy the game felt to play, which when combined with a review embargo that prevented the press from playing and judging a pre-release version of the game, confidence in APB and Real-Time Worlds sank through the floor. In general, review embargoes, kinda like a smoking gun. Total development cost on APB stood at $100 million, and to the surprise of no one I'm sure, Real-Time struggled to make even a fraction of that back and went out of business just over a month after the game first came out. These days, APB is free to play and owned by K2 Network, a company who specialise in repurposing failing MMOs and making them a little more profitable. Oh, so they're like an animal shelter, but for expensive video games. Aw, almost makes wasting millions of dollars sound adorable. I think any game that destroys the company who made it can be described as having wasted a lot of money. If you're making it so that people can't pay their employees, then I think it's safe to say that a lot of money was wasted and that it's worth talking about. That being said, I'm now just wondering if we can go further than that. Why be content with destroying just the one game studio when we can possibly find a game that came close to destroying the entire industry? Yeah, you know where this is going, but it needs saying, because whenever something like games development reaches some kind of critical mass where oversaturation is a pressing problem that no one wants to address, then you only have to look back on history for what happens when pressure builds and all of it is released at once as E.T. the Extraterrestrial for the Atari 2600. And no one wants that. Atari were the big dogs in the early 1980s and had cornered so much of the market that I'm sure they felt as though every decision they could possibly make would work out in some way. Unfortunately, the market was tipping over to the point of collapse even before Atari bet it all on the wrong horse, since there were too many consoles and definitely too many shitty games floating around for the general public to retain a sense of hope and optimism that the gaming industry was moving in the right direction. Atari proved the people correct and rushed E.T. out with just 5 weeks of coding so that it'd be ready in time for the 1982 holiday season. They were so confident that it would bang that they ordered 5 million cartridges to be produced, except they only sold 1.5 million, with a lot of that number being reduced back after customers demanded refunds because E.T. was just that bad. The unsold copies were confirmed to have been dumped in a landfill in New Mexico where they stayed for more than 20 years, and Atari were divided and sold 2 years later, having failed to recoup the $25 million they spent on licensing E.T., which was thrown onto the $500 million they already owed. E.T. wasn't the sole reason why Atari went under or why the market crashed so hard in 1983, but there's an argument to be made that it was the straw that broke the camel's back, and if it wasn't for Nintendo, this video would have been about the worst Marvel movies or something. So there's a few reasons to be happy. I subscribe to the thought that we can learn something from history, and while I don't think we're headed for a similar kind of market crash to 1983, I do think we can learn something from Atari's treatment of E.T. and to make sure you don't bet it all on something so risky. This is RabbidLuigi, and if you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe, and also there's another one here about games that punish cheaters really harshly. I enjoyed making that, you might enjoy watching it. And also over here somewhere, I want to thank my top supporters on Patreon, including Sarah Mallion, Christopher Robinson, and the Green Scorpion. Thank you all for watching, and remember, do not invest in Atari.